Hello everyone, welcome to the second module, which is about demand and supply. Now, before you move on, before you watch this video, ensure that you are familiar with demand and supply basics. That includes the law of demand, the law of supply, the different variables or the different factors that can shift your demand and supply curves. You also have to know how to derive the linear demand and or supply function equations, and as well as finding the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. It's also good if you know how to plot already the different points in your demand curve and in your supply curve and finding the equilibrium point in that particular graph. If you are not yet familiar with those things, if you've forgotten those things, kindly review first, because this particular discussion assumes that you are already aware of those topics. As I have mentioned, we will talk about demand and supply here, and the book that you'll be using will still be the book of Mark Hershey. These are the things that we will be discussing in this particular video, although again, as I have mentioned, probably this will be divided into 3 videos or 3 parts. And this is the first out of 3 videos. These are the key concepts that you must be familiar with. Okay, now what is demand? Demand is the number of goods and services that people are willing and able to buy at different price levels. And the basis for demand is actually or are actually utility and profitability. Now there are two kinds. Let's talk about direct demand. We'll talk about derived demand later. Direct demand is the quantity that consumers are willing to buy under market conditions. Direct demand is demand for consumption. You buy things, you want to get these things, you need these things because they give you utility, they give you happiness, they give you satisfaction because you want it, because you need it. Okay, that's the basis for direct demand. What about derived demand? Derived demand is input demand. The basis for this demand is the possibility of getting a profit. We know that there are items that are purchased not because people want them or people get happiness from them, but because these things, these outputs are being used as inputs, okay, for by other firms so that they can produce something. These firms buy these outputs, they demand for these outputs because they know that or they see the possibility of getting a profit from it. If they convert this outputs, or if they make these outputs as inputs, and if they convert it into another output or another product, and if they earn something from it, then that will derive demand, okay, because of profitability. So firms demand inputs that can be profitably employed. Demand is determined by price, prices of other goods, income, and so on. So probably you have already learned in your microeconomics class the law of demand. The law of demand says that when the price increases, quantity demanded decreases, right? People will buy less if the price is high, but if the price is low, people will buy more. Okay, ceteris paribus, which means all other factors remaining constant. And these other factors are prices of other goods, income, and so on. So aside from the price of the product, there are other variables that can influence demand. And these are the ones: prices of other goods, income, and so on. So for example, we'll talk about gasoline, okay, gasoline and cars, okay. Cars use gasoline. So if the price of gasoline changes, there will be a change in the demand for cars. So right now, the price of gasoline is increasing, the demand for cars would have probably been affected. So there was probably a decrease in the demand for cars. Okay, another example would be, let's say, electricity and appliances. So these are two products, and appliances make use of electricity so that they will function. And if the rate of electricity changes, the demand for appliances will also change. Another factor that can potentially influence or determine demand is income. So we know usually if we're talking about luxury items, if the income of the buyers increases, then the demand for luxury items will probably increase at the same time. Will probably increase also. And if we're talking about inferior goods, like let us say noodles or maybe dried fish, if there is a decrease in income, and that is when the demand for these inferior goods will increase. Okay? So it's somehow telling us that baliktad siya, or there is an inverse relationship between the income and the demand for inferior goods. So if we're talking about luxury products, the higher the income is, the higher will be the demand for that particular product. But if we're talking about inferior goods, the lower the income is, the higher will be or if there is decrease in the income, there will be an increase in the demand for inferior products, because that's when people experience a decrease in their resources, they will tend to look for products that are cheaper. So the demand for the products that are quite cheaper or more affordable will increase. Okay, probably we can also include preferences in some of the in the determinants of demand. So the preferences or the likes of the people will influence the demand of a certain product. So it could be that during this time in this season, the demand for this wardrobe is quite high because that's what people want as of the moment. But after like 1 year or 6 months, the demand for that particular outfit or style has already decreased because that's not what people prefer. So preference can also be a determinant of demand. Okay. There are other determinants. Let's say we can also include advertisement. So the number of hours that you spend on advertising a certain product on TV will probably influence the demand also of a certain product. Industry demand versus firm demand. Industry demand is subject to general economic conditions. So we're talking about the demand for the entire industry, whereas when you say firm demand, it's we're just talking about one company, and it's determined by economic conditions and competition. So if we're talking about firm demand, it is more likely influenced by what the what the competitors are doing. So the changes in the price of the competitors will influence most likely the demand of a certain firm. But it can also be determined by economic conditions like unemployment, the rise or the decrease in the income of its buyers, or probably, let's say, inflation. But for industry demand, it is more subject to general economic conditions. We're talking about economic growth. We're talking about inflation movements of the general price level. We're talking about employment or unemployment. Okay, so the industry demand is determined by those kinds of factors. But for firm demand, although it can also be influenced by economic conditions, but it is very much affected also by what its competitors are doing. What is a demand curve? A demand curve is the graphical representation of the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. So let's just go back to what we discussed about the law of demand. We said that as price increases, right, the quantity demanded decreases. And as price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. That's the law of demand. Ceteris paribus. It's normal that people will buy more if the price is low, and they will buy less if the price is high. And we can see here that relationship. Okay, the relationship that we see here is the relationship between the price and the QD. And as you can see, the direction of the arrow is in inverse for P when it comes to when the QD goes the arrow when the QD goes down, the P goes up. So we can see the inverse relationship, or we can say it's an indirect relationship, or maybe a negative relationship. Okay, and that kind of relationship can be seen through a table, because there are three ways in which you can uh, show the relationship between price and QT. So the first one is through a table. So for example, you have here the price and then the Q. So the price is 0, 2, 4. And as your price goes up, the QD goes down. Okay, this is just an example. 0 at the price of 0, Q is 100. QD is the 100. The QD is 100. And if the price is 2, the QD goes down. And if the price is 4, the QD goes down further. So you see the relationship as P goes up, QD goes down. So this is a demand schedule. And this is the tabular form of showing the relationship between price and QD. Now, if you're going to uh, illustrate this and create a graph out of this schedule, you are making a demand curve. So how do we actually do this? Again, this is basic microeconomics. Let's say you have QD here, you have 0, 2, 4. Okay, and then for Q, you have here 60, 80, 100. So first, you have to plot 0 and 100. That's the first combination. 2 and 80, second combination. And then 4 and 60. So what do you do next? You have to, okay, you have to connect all dots. Connect all dots in order to create the curve. Oops, it doesn't look nice. Okay, just imagine that it's a perfect curve. Okay, so you have a demand curve. And what do you notice with your demand curve? The demand curve is going down. It's downward sloping. Okay, it's not going up. It's not upward sloping, it's downward sloping. That's because you have an inverse relationship between price and QD. And it's actually because of the income effect and the substitution effect. Okay. Recall what we said about the law of demand, diba? As the price changes, QD changes, ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus means that all the other factors are assumed to be constant. Now, in this particular demand, we are assuming here that only price is changing and all the other factors are fixed or are constant, including income. So income, because you're working on a fixed income, there is no way for you to keep the same number of items as price increases, right? So let's say, for example, your income is just around you're working on a 200 allowance. If the price is or maybe let's say 300. If the price is 4, maybe you can buy 60 or more of it because it's still within 300 pesos. But as your income changes, as your price changes, as it goes up, you will have to buy lesser and lesser number of items. Okay? And that's why it's going up. So as at 0, you can buy about 100. But with an increase in the price from 0 to 2, then you will have just to settle with 80 because you're working on a fixed income. And as the price goes up from 2 to 4, you will just have to buy only 60 because of the income effect. Okay? The other one is the substitution effect. As prices go up from 0 to 2 to 4, buyers tend to look for substitutes. They will look for items that will satisfy them or that will maybe serve the same purpose, okay, and that which will not force them to spend a lot. And so there is a decrease in the quantity being demanded as prices go up because buyers tend to look for alternatives, substitutes, as prices are becoming heavier or higher for them to buy or reach. So that's the substitution effect. So this is what you call a demand curve. So you see still the relationship between price and QD. It's downward sloping because they have an inverse relationship. Okay? And the inverse relationship is syempre being forced by the income effect and the substitution effect. All non-price variables in your demand curve are held constant. And the only variable that is the only factor here that is considered as a variable is the price. So price is moving from uh, 0 to 2, 2 to 4. This is an example of a demand curve. Now, you might be asking, what is this? Q is equal to 20,500,000 minus 500p. This is your demand function equation. There are three ways to represent or to present the relationship between price and QD. So the first one is the demand schedule. That's the tabular form. Then you have the demand curve, which is the graphical form. And then the last one is the demand function, which is the mathematical form of showing the relationship between Q and P. So as you can see here, Q is outside because the quantity will change if the P will change. So they are both variables. Remember that if price increases, Q will decrease. If price decreases, Q will increase. Okay? And usually the 20,500,000, that's what you call autonomous demand. This is the quantity that buyers are willing to and able to buy if the price is 0. Okay, so let's say it's being given for free. The quantity that will be demanded will be 20,500,000. Now, what about the negative 500 here? That is your slope. This is this will determine how steep your demand function is. Okay, so that steepness, how steep. Okay, the steepness of your demand function. So negative 500 here would mean that for every 1 unit increase in price, your quantity demanded will drop by 500. So if you put here 1 instead of P, you multiply negative 500 by 1. So you will have to deduct negative 500 from the 20,500,000. So your Q will drop by 500. And if your price will become 2, then what you will be deducting from the 20,500,000 is 1,000, because for every 1 unit change in price, there is going to be a drop in your Q by 500. Okay? But if your price decreases, let's say the original price is 5 and it drops to 4, then your Q will increase, because instead of deducting a bigger amount, you will have to deduct a lesser amount now from your 20,500,000. So this is your demand function. And there is a way for you to derive this in our refresher video. There is a tutorial there on how you're going to derive the linear demand function. Okay, and what about this? P is equal to 41,000 minus 0.02 Q. This is just the inverse demand function. Okay, so it's basically putting Okay, please focus your eyes here. This one here. Okay, it's basically just doing this. The negative 500 will be transposed to this side, so it become 500p is equal to 20,500,000 minus q. Okay, you're transposing q to the other side, and to get the value of p, divide both sides by 500, and by doing so, you have 41,000. 20,500,000 divided by 500, that's 41,000. And then once you do minus q, automatically there is a coefficient of 1 here. Okay, so for sure you're aware of that. There is 1 here. So 1 divided by 500, that is 0.002. Okay, so that's basically it. That's the inverse demand function. Okay, and so how do we determine, how do we know that this is how we're going to draw our demand function? This is it. Remember what I said earlier, the 20,500,000, that is your quantity if the price is 0. Where is your price? 0 price? Here. And we're talking about the quantity. The quantity is always in this axis. The price is always in this axis if we're going to draw our demand curve. So if you have a price of 0 here, so you look for the quantity that is equivalent to 20,500,000. And remember, this is already quantity of new automobiles in millions. So it's probably here. Okay? So we know already the end of our demand curve. And how about this one? How do we know this? We try to get the inverse demand function. This 41,000 now, if 20,500,000 is your Q, if P is 0, then the 41,000 is your price if the quantity is 0. How much will be the price for you to totally lose the quantity being demanded? For quantity demanded to drop to 0, the price should be 41,000. So that's what we mean by this one. Okay, so here look for the 41, 0 quantity. Okay, and then the price of 41,000 is right here. Okay, so connect both sides, you have your demand function. Okay, so please remember that in a demand, not demand function, but you have your demand curve. Now remember what I said earlier. In your demand curve, the only variable is price. Okay, so I'm putting here some certain points. Okay, let's put point A, point B, point C, and point D. If the price is 35, the quantity being demanded is between 0 and 5. So probably it's around 2.5. Let's say it's 2.5. We're allowing a decimal point. But if the price will drop from 35 to 25, so price is the only one that is changing, the quantity will be around 8. Okay, probably because 7.5 is right here in the middle, so this is probably 8. So as your price drops, the quantity demanded increases. So let's drop the price further. We're dropping it to 15. And with that, our quantity demanded increases to 14. Let's drop the price further to 5. And with that, our quantity demanded is around 18. So what do you notice? as price drops, QD is increasing. Okay? Do not assume that QD is decreasing because the curve is going down. The arrow is going down. No, it's actually increasing ang QD as price is dropping because the bigger quantity is right here towards the right. Okay? But if we look at a different direction, if we're coming from this side to this side, from letter D to letter C, we're seeing an increase in the price, right? From 5, you increase the price to 15. So what happens? If you increase the price from 5 to 15, your quantity demanded will move from this is around 18 to 14. There is an upward movement. So please do not get confused. Again, as price increases, QD decreases. Okay? But what is the movement? We're talking about the movement, that the changes in the QD, the movement along the curve. The movement along the curve is upward. Okay? Just like what happened here, D to C, price is increasing. But if price is decreasing, like from A to B, B to C, diba? There is an increase in the QD. And you can clearly see it. This is around 2.5 to 8. So there is an increase in the QD, but the movement in the curve is downward. Okay. So along the curve, only price is changing. All the other factors are constant. Okay? So I hope that that is clear to everyone. So again, the movement along the curve happens when there is a change in the price. And if there is a change in the other variables, aside from price, the movement will not be up or down. The movement will be right. That's an arrow actually. Or movement to the left. So when you see that the demand curve is moving to the right, okay, that there is an increase in demand, not quantity demanded. There is an increase in demand. When the demand curve is moving to the left or shifting to the left, there is a decrease in the demand. So I'll just give you an example. Let's talk about the other factors affecting demand. We're not talking about the price, because if the price changes, we can only see up or down movements. But if there are other factors that will affect the price, affect the demand, then the movement will be right or left. So let's go back to what is happening nowadays. There is a very high change in the price of gasoline. So around like more than a month ago, or maybe 2 months ago, the price of gasoline or diesel was just around 45 to 50 pesos. Now, in the past weeks, it has risen from 50 to 55 to 60, 65, 75, 80, 85, 90. Okay? So that the price of gasoline will affect the demand for cars. Remember that we are not talking about the price of the car, because I said earlier, right, that if we're talking about changes in the price, the movement is up or down. But we are not talking about the change in the price of the car. We're talking about the change in the price of the gasoline. Okay? Affecting the demand for cars. So we are totally talking about two different items, gasoline and cars. If we're seeing cars, price of cars, demand for cars, then it will be an up or down movement, whatever happens to price. But we're talking about the price of gasoline affecting the demand for the car. So what will potentially happen is this is your demand going to shift to the right if there is an increase in the price of gasoline, or is your demand for cars going to shift to the left? the answer here is letter B. Because there is an increase in the price of gasoline, the demand for cars shifted to the left. So people were somehow doubtful now if they should invest on cars because they see that the price of fuel has gone up drastically in the past weeks. So probably there's still some who are buying cars, but those who have been planning probably to buy, uh, might have been some people who have decided to not buy as of the moment because of the increase in the prices of fuel or gasoline. Okay, so another example here, another shift of your demand curve example would be, let's say, um, let's talk about preferences. I mentioned earlier that preferences will affect demand. So let's say that people saw that Blackpink wore this kind of um, bag. Blackpink members wore this kind of bag. So probably the fans will start looking for that bag. And because they saw that their idols are wearing it, so the demand for that particular item will rise. But since the factor is not price related, it's preferences, then the movement will be shift to the right or shift to the left. In this case, the answer is shift to the right. So there will be an increase in the demand because of preferences. Okay? So please do not get confused with an up or down movement and a shift. Okay. So these are different examples, or these are the different uh, demand curves. So you see here the first demand curve, which is the demand for a certain automobile if the interest rate of getting a loan is 6%. And this is again the demand curve for that automobile if the interest rate of getting a loan is 8%. So there is an increase in the price of in the interest rates of loans from 6%, 8%, or 10%. So while you are seeing this, what do you think if you are the one applying for a loan to get an automobile, to get a car? Which one is the most favorable situation for you? At what interest rate? The highest or the lowest? So for sure, it's when the interest rate is at the lowest. And that's why you see here that demand curve is in the most rightward area. Okay? If the interest rate is 10%, this will just be the demand curve. But if the interest rate lowers down, then that will be more favorable. The demand curve will shift to the right. So it's from 10% to 8%. If the interest rate will drop to 6%, then that will be most favorable, okay, to the borrowers of or to the car loan customers. So the demand will shift further to the right. Okay? And as you can see, every time there is a change in the demand curve, there are also changes in your autonomous demand. Okay? But in this particular example, all of the slopes are the same. Now, you don't have to worry about these things first. You just really have to understand, okay, what this particular graph means. Okay, so now you know that these three curves somehow tell you that there can be movements, okay, or shifts, actually shifts to the right or to the left in your demand curve when the other factors will change aside from price. But if we're just talking about changes in the price, if you can simply please ignore, let's just ignore these two. And you focus on this particular graph. If the price is 25, 6 is demanded. if the price is 21, a little above 20, then 8 is demanded. So as the price drops from 25 to 21, the quantity demanded for cars increases from 6 to 8. So there is a downward movement as the price drops. Okay? QD increase from 6 to 8. So this is what I was talking about. If you're just talking about changes in the price, the movement will be up or down. But if we're talking about other factors affecting demand, then the movement will be right or left. A rightward shift will signal an increase in demand. A leftward shift will signal a decrease in demand. Okay, so that will be all for our first part of this module. So that's 1/3 of the videos, and in the next video we'll talk about the basis for supply.